Okay, let's check if it's on the site. Yeah, should be going there. Okay. Okay, and this is episode 58. Yeah.
58. Wow, you guys have been at this, man.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 2 years, more, I think, because we originally had sort of a pilot, and then we had to talk to a publisher, and yeah. Every episode, we're always kind of shocked.
That's a commitment, man. 58 is a commitment.
It is.
If we know how to do anything, it's commit to a bit.
That's true. Everything's a long con, I guess. Okay. So welcome to episode 58 of the following Mechanical Turks project. And this time we're happy to have with us Dr. Ben Hanrahan, who's going to talk to us about some of his work, which we've touched upon in previous episodes, looking at Turker demographics, ways that Turkers are selecting different hits. Definitely relevant to us in this second product, where we're looking at that kind of rhetorically, right? What are the aspects that maybe induce those choices? And as we were seeing in our preliminary results, kind of surprising for us, they didn't seem quite as dependent on things like language, right? Like it was maybe less significant, the text we were using in order to get responses, and maybe it was more reward structure that had a kind of significant impact. So we were just talking with Ben about his background, and potentially that's a way into this topic.
Sure. So I was trained as a computer scientist, and specifically in my PhD in human-computer interaction. Human-computer interaction is a very big umbrella that a lot of things fit under. The part that I do is I really like building pieces of software and having people use them and see what that means in their life and or in their practice, and sort of iterating and evaluating. In my field, doing the studies, one of the hardest thing is adoption. So I'll also like look at platforms that are interesting to me and tools that are interesting. And I was really drawn to Amazon Mechanical Turk. I think that's one of the questions you have. Mm-hmm. And what drew me to Amazon Mechanical Turk was a number of stuff. So at the time I was working at Xerox Research Center Europe with David Martin. And we were reading papers and about Amazon Mechanical Turk and trying to figure it out. And one of the things that really sort of bothered us, we're fairly curmudgeonly people, I guess, was that people were writing about the Amazon Mechanical Turkers like it was not work at the time. Like that was a pretty prevalent, you'd see it in popular press and, spare cycles. That was really kind of the language that they were using themselves at Amazon to be like, oh, this is not a job. This is not a this. Mm-hmm. And the work that was being done on Amazon Mechanical Turk really reminded us of a lot of the work we were studying at Xerox. So while everybody knows Xerox for copiers, when we were working there, they had a huge customer service and data entry. I mean, it was like tens of thousands of people. I think it's broken off now. But we were studying people that worked at home and did like medical form data entry. We worked at call centers a lot. And this seemed pretty similar to the type of work we were seeing. And so we wanted to look at it more. And then that just opened up the whole can of worms. Our first paper was the Being a Turker paper. I don't know if you've read that one or not, but yes. That was our first sort of foray into the field. And then we worked on it for a while.
Yeah, and we noticed in that one, there's an overlap in the authors in terms of some are listed with academic affiliations and some with, as you point out, commercial or professional affiliations. So,
right. There was one woman, Neha Gupta, was she on that one? I can't remember.
mhm,
Yeah.
So that's somewhat of a byproduct of the some things are a little bit different in Europe, how you can integrate PhDs into industry. And so
mm,
Neha was a student that was working with us at Nottingham, I think.
mm.
And so Jackie and Dave supervised her, sort of like some of her work there. So in Europe, you can kind of do some of your dissertation work at a company, which is a little bit different. It's easier to do it there than it is here anyway. But it
Well,
was mostly a Xerox research.
yeah.
Why they let us do that, I don't know.
And of course, Xerox has that rich history in computers. I mean, a lot of what we know as our contemporary computer interface comes out of Xerox research.
Right. Mostly out of Xerox. A lot of those things were out of Xerox Park.
Yeah.
Um, Xerox Research Center Europe, there was a really strong tradition of what's called work practice. So it's roughly based on like an ethnomethodological tradition, like tracing back to like Garfinkel. And then one of its, I guess, in like one sentence, what the work practice sort of thing is, which I'm sure somebody that does work practice will think I'm oversimplifying it, but is to focus on the practice and not the products,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds easy. But if you ever go to for instance, the doctors and you are with a nurse and they're at the computer typing the whole time, that's because they've mismodeled the practice of nursing, which is an act of like care, to record keeping. And so they say the job is the records, but the records are a reflection of the practice of the job.
Yeah, and that's really interesting for our field in Ret Comp, right? There's one of its sort of animating pillars at this point is the practice process division, right? That a couple of decades ago, there was I think a recognized now collective shift from focusing on the writing process as producing a work, right? It's like, this is how you evaluate it by this product. An increased pedagogical shift to the processes behind that. So we saw, shifts into things like pre-writing and, how do you actually compose research? And that's what we started to focus on. And we're still in the thick of that, I would say, Nathaniel, where it's not like the pendulum has swung back, right?
No, and in fact, too, even trying to think of the one of the responses to that was called the process movement, is it actually broke it down into two. It became sort of formulaic. And so now thinking of process as a much more distributed and not necessarily totally reducible to the individual writer, right? Where the writer makes a series of intentional choices and that's the writing process. So thinking about other things that are part of the writing process, which is interesting. I mean, that leads some in rhetoric to be interested precisely in things like human-computer interaction, right? That the idea that the tools and techniques that writers are working with aren't simply tools, but they're actually an active part of the process.
Yeah, so that's one of the things when you're designing software systems, like that kind of struggle with over formalizing or routinizing the process. What you're doing in computer programming is committing a practice to an actual formal language. Right. And so what you wind up doing is taking this very, malleable practice, and the more you enter design into that, the less malleable that practice is, because you're formalizing it, right? So, if you go and you use a government system now to navigate a bureaucracy, that's defined in a very physical way, the actions you can take now. Whereas if you go and you say, I got to fill this paper form out, and you're with somebody and you're trying to get something, there's more improvisation that can happen in there, and malleability. So like the more design you do, the less malleability, the less malleable the practice is, and the more routinized it is, and the more you try and reduce it to things, which happens a lot in Mechanical Turk.
Yeah. And something we've been looking at in both of the products is this potential thing we're seeing in terms of growing together. Because one of the things we're interested in examining is this interaction between what is algorithmic and what is potentially not algorithmic in these platforms or in these interactions. And so, the sense in which there are potentially standardized rules being set that then invite a particular kind of response by humans, but then those behaviors become internalized in certain ways. So we're seeing things like, in a sense, the machine gets more kind of, it can do things that we don't associate with an algorithm or with a machine. So even some of those things we were talking about in terms of like expressing hesitancy, right? Saying, I don't quite understand this, but here's my summary. You can certainly do that now with text production platform. I mean, GPT-3, we kind of talked about a little bit in this, and they now have a new iteration of that out. I guess I saw an announcement a few days ago that they're moving away from GPT-3 to a new one. And it can do those things. And so we're starting to see this kind of growing together where you see a kind of replication or mimicking of the human in the algorithmic, but we also see in the human a growth towards this kind of standardization. And we were looking at things like, producing responses that are easily intelligible to the machine. So, if you're doing something like, recognizing handwriting, right? The best handwriting is starting to be the handwriting that is comprehensible to humans and to machines, right? This kind of like universal legibility, right? So it's, it's something we're examining, this notion of like growing together. We're the human and the non-human are co-influencing each other. We don't have like a clear point to that yet.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things you think about in design is that people are more adaptable than machines. And when you're designing types of systems, you're wanting to operationalize certain outcomes so that you can prove that they happen. So that you can go to, advertisers and say, this happened, and this is our proxy for the actual thing. Because all these are the handwriting thing isn't a proxy, but a lot of the things that I'm talking about are proxies for human behavior, like signals, or like they're not the thing, and they're not even, if you really pull them apart, maybe the thing much at all. Like if you're, I don't know what they do now, but if you click on a search result, it's like, okay, they found what they were looking for. Maybe not. You can make a good argument that they did. You can make an argument that they didn't. But the handwriting example, it's a lot easier for a human to change so that the machine can interpret it than it is for the machine to change for the human to let it be, right? So clicking on a mouse is not a very natural thing. Like clicking on a button on a screen is pretty weird. But we're able to do that. And then the language that the computer most understands is that direct manipulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets at what we're interested in. I mean, it's why the title of that piece, the Being a Turker, is interested to us is, I mean, for us too, that interesting question of being, right? That actually what it means to be. And so I think a lot of times the focus is, right, with machine learning is getting machines to be more like humans, but as you're describing, the other half of it is actually getting humans to
Right.
behave more machinically
Correct.
so that they're more recognizable to the system.
Well, it's more recognizable. It's also easier. So think about something like, well, let's stay on Amazon Mechanical Turk, but I'm going to quickly go to Uber. So Amazon Mechanical Turk is not a natural way for you to do a lot of, like, it's not a great way to do work, right? It's super small. You don't know what the reason for it is. It has all of the meaning is taken out of it. You don't really know what you're doing, right? Because they've made it such a small atom of work that they've taken the meaning out of it. I mean, there's no visibility of, like, you know, that thing, you know, my little piece of this effort turned into that,
right?
Or my little thing does this. Like, it's not even clear who the requester is sometimes. Like, big companies will use Amazon Mechanical Turk and use aliases. So the at least they did it back in the day. I'm not sure they do it as much anymore. They all have their own platforms now. So why do they do those little like tiny atoms of work? Why are they atomicizing? I'm not real sure what the word would be, but they're making it smaller and smaller and smaller units of work that make less sense to the person, but they make more sense to the algorithmic system. Whether that's machine learning or not, remember that all computer programmers are all programs are algorithmic systems. It's just that some of them have probability models and some don't. So it's easier to make the algorithms happen, you know, laissez-faire, when it's smaller units of work.
Yeah.
Why? Because there are less dependencies.
Right.
There's less improvisation. So if you're doing something like food delivery, the way that they'll, you know, the easiest way to build a system to do it is one person, one delivery. But that doesn't make sense from the efficiency at a local level. It makes efficiency from the sense of a computer managing this globally. But if you were running a delivery service, that's not what you would do, right? And so they make this very atomic units of work, but then there are properties of their system that take advantage of that or depend on that atomicity. So they depend on to enable that. So they flood the labor market. So that's where their resilience comes from, is they have small units of work and lots of workers to do it. Because they're not concerned about investing in workforce. They don't need to be. That's how they've set the system up. So if you were running a delivery service that hired workers, you would have to be, you would be optimizing at a different sort.
Yeah.
Right. You would be like, chain those together so I have that, like, that one person can do those deliveries in an efficient way. You would be optimizing efficiency a different way. It's not that it's less efficient. It's that it's efficient for a different optimization.
Yeah, that's for some reason that I think Jeremy and I've discussed this before, right? It's akin to, you know, the sort of industrialization of farming, right? And we need a machine that picks tomatoes without bursting them. And it turns out one solution is actually just to change the tomato so that it's got a thicker skin so the machine can't break it, right? And for some reason, right, we imagining in a mechanical Turk style system, right, the tomato is the human is the tomato, right? We need to make you more uniform.
Yeah,
so
I find their logic very circular when they're like, well, we can't solve this problem. Yeah, but you created the problem.
Right.
Like, people were able to get rides and food before.
Right. This is historically not been a huge problem. Yeah. The 30 minutes or free pizza delivery thing seemed to pretty much solve the problem.
There is something really I mean, and neither of us really have, I mean, this is someone else we're going to need to talk to about, because that level of like containerizing labor, I mean, just sort of hyper Marxist or anti Marxist, right? Where it's like, it's just abstract acts with no connection to cause or to output, right? It's just like this unit that you contribute or that anyone could contribute, right? Yeah, I was looking. So it looks like in your work, you've done a lot of work on these issues of labor, potentially in different scenarios, rural or urban situations or different crowdsourced situations. What sort of is your approach to these kind of labor questions?
I talk to labor people and ask them what is going on. I mean, that's largely what I do. I have a collaborator right now, Michael Maffei, that we've been writing a lot of. I don't know that any of it's been published yet, but we've been working together quite a lot. It's not always the most complex. Like, it's so bad that it's not that complex of a labor situation. It's like, I mean, they're taking advantage of the individual contractor stuff. They're isolating workers in an almost purposeful way to me to limit the possibility of collective action. And like, how much labor do you need to know that it's bad? But I come at it from, it's influenced by my colleague a lot, from this sort of efficiency, equity, and voice triangle, and like that balance, like how much do you go for efficiency, how much do you go for voice? It's sort of like this balance. I'm not so sure they're as mutually exclusive, and I think there's another layer they don't capture that we were just talking about. Well, maybe they do in some of their other work, but what you're trying to make efficient, what you're optimizing for. In actual fact, Uber's not efficient in terms of making money. Uber's and all of these platforms are not all that efficient in terms of like wasted work hours. There's quite a lot of waste in these systems that they don't talk about because they don't capture the waste, because they're not interested in capturing the waste. Because if they capture it, then they might have to deal with it later on.
Right. They might have to capture it. They might have to compensate it.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I find worrying in some of the academic literature, is like worrying that, are we getting they need to give us access to the data. Yeah, but they control what is in the data.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a sort of large question of of visibility. You can only see what's recorded, right? So it's, I mean, if you can only dice the data, so many ways based on what columns you're given here.
Yeah. We've all done studies, right? And there's questions that you're like, oh, I wish I'd collected that data, and you didn't, so you can't answer that question. Well, they are asking questions that are different than mine, right?
I think potentially related to that, because one thing that in being a Turker it points out is, and Nathaniel and I have talked about this quite a bit, and largely kind of in preparation for a later piece, we're going to be more explicitly engaging these issues. But there's a kind of resistance from the Turkers for observation, right? Either from journalists or from academics. And it's certainly something we've brushed up against personally and are sympathetic to. It's like, we are potentially outsiders entering into this. And, obviously we have a lot of, unacknowledged ignorance about how certain things operate. And so we're kind of engaging this question of, we can see the workers, the Turkers, as being exploited in certain ways, but there's also, a kind of palpable resistance from the Turkers themselves, from viewing themselves through that lens, right? If that makes sense, right? It's like they don't want to be
themselves as exploited, right? Nobody.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they have, I think they have, and they certainly are aware and feel that they've been misrepresented in a lot of academic literature and popular press. There are aspects of how they were represented that are true. Like, we were very, very careful, in particular in those first few papers, like Being a Turker and Turk Life in India, and some of the global one that David led. We would give Turkers access to it before publishing it. And we were very careful to write that in a way that they felt represented them. Because it's really easy to look at it from our perspective and interpret it a certain way, which isn't reflective of their feelings about themselves and the way they view themselves, and, like, their lives and stuff. I mean, I think they really resist that, and they really don't like the calls, and this is their stuff. Like, we were always careful to say this is what they think, and not put too much of ourselves. That's that, like, sort of, Dave was a very ethno-methodology kind of guy. We don't always agree with everything, right? They're a bit more libertarian than I would be, but their voice deserves to be entered into the conversation about them, right? And that's what they're sort of resisting, is because that's also, you have to remember that this type of work is a bit of a safety net for them. So it's a high stakes thing if, for us to just say, oh, they should be doing this.
Right.
Well, that's us just saying something, and that's their, like, oh, if you do that, I feel like my livelihood, this safety net that I have, will go away. And so who wants that written about them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we struggle with that. And we talked to Kagel about that issue as well. And I mean, it's something we struggle with, I think, in part because our disciplinary relationship. I mean, our discipline relies a lot on contingent labor, and talks about these things, but really hasn't healed itself in terms of you want just in brass tacks, you want to give people courses to teach, right? Composition teachers, here are courses. At the same time, we're aware that is systematically not great. I mean, it's preventing them from getting benefits from putting together a living wage, but there's not a clear way out of this exactly, that isn't painful to everybody involved.
Yeah, I would say that's true about Amazon Mechanical Turk.
Well, it's true even in there's some interesting relations to systems that are developed for tech writers in various firms that look similar to Mechanical Turks, right? Where they write paragraphs at a time, and then somebody else assembles the document later on. And so there's the way that even written tasks, like you just write the abstract, someone else writes up this, and then whoever, right, management can then, well, we need a short description, so we pull from this. And so even the writer of the document, they're not there from beginning to end, right? They're just writing these pieces.
No.
So I have a question for you all, actually.
Yes.
So you're, another word that's hard for me to say, rhetoricists? Is that how you say it?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say rhetorician, but I mean, it's okay. It's like I even, because I'm in a professional and technical writing program, but I do tell people I'm a rhetorician.
Yeah. Okay. Have you looked at the rhetoric, what I would consider the rhetoric of design of these platforms?
What could you define that for us?
I'll try. So if you look at the design choices that are made on something like Amazon Mechanical Turk, they tend to push you, or I don't know, maybe you would say even persuade you down a path of thinking. They at least lead you down a path of thinking that has had, I believe it has had a fairly real effect on particularly the early stuff and how requesters view workers. So if you look at, and it may have been not, I'm not even sure that it was on purpose. It may have been, I'm not really sure. But if you look at like the original or the early stuff, it still kind of looks this way. But if you look from what a requester would see, it looks like you are engaging with processing units in a similar way that you were engaging with Amazon Web Surf, like AWS EC2 processing units.
Mm-hmm.
And so it primes you to think that way because it gives it a number. That number like looks kind of similar to like one of the machine numbers or whatever.
Right.
And it does not. So when you're talking about invisibility, this is where like we wrote about it a bit in Being Turker, but there's these different types of invisibility that operate on these platforms. One of them is that it's hard to like find the human.
Right.
Others are that there's like the outputs of their work are invisible, like they're invisible to us who consume them all the time. Like the internet largely operates on the backs of crowd workers. You know, if you go to Amazon and you do a search for, you know, a woodworking chisel, all throughout there, they've done work, but there's no marks of workers there.
Mm-hmm.
So like all these design decisions, design is a persuasive act.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the choices they make mean things. And they mean things in a way that we're not used to thinking of them because they are restricting actions. We often think in the positive sense of we're granted these new powers by an interface.
Mm-hmm.
But the things they don't implement or the manner in which they implement them also restrict actions. Take Amazon Mechanical Turk, for instance. You may have, I'm going to just assume you have not read my papers because I'm not that egotistical. But in one of our papers, we wrote about the blocking mechanism. I forget which one. So it's very unbalanced. So requesters can block a Turker from working on their tasks. A requester or a Turker cannot block a requester from appearing in their like list, right? There's no, you can complain, but they're not captured in the same way, and actions are not taken in the same way on behalf of whichever stakeholder by the system. Like those types of choices that they make aren't necessarily tangible. Like that's, how do you feel a thing that wasn't built?
Right.
But that matters, right?
Yeah.
And it is persuasive in the sense that in like a super persuasive sense is you just can't do it.
Right.
Like, gravity is pretty persuasive.
Indeed.
But there's also like the way they frame stakeholders to each other.
Yeah.
So like Uber frames your fellow drivers as competitors.
Mm.
Well, that sort of dissuades collective action, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, I think that's really,
yeah.
That's why I think we're excited to talk to you too, I think those are very much things we're interested in, but it's also to really get at the rhetoric of those designs would require us to be more conversant in the design itself. So in many ways, right, we tend to focus on persuasion with respect to language.
Yeah. Because
language is that's a technology we're comfortable working in. But as soon as you get into the persuasiveness of design, it requires you to, right? It's similar. I think I once asked, it's always an analogy I go to. I was taking an astronomy class, as an undergraduate, and I got really fascinated in it. And I finally was asking the professor some questions about astronomy, and finally the professor said, "How much math do you know?" And I said, "Not much." And he goes, "Well, then I can't answer your question. Right at that point, we have to move from this language to another language." Being that, but I think you're dead on, right? The way that it enables and constrains people, and then additionally, right, the way that it relates various actors to each other in a system has profound impacts on how those actors see themselves, what kinds of skills they may like develop. So for instance, for us, right, that the whole notion of mechanical Turk is not just, it's mechanical, the system of mechanical Turks is potentially having a meaningful impact on how we understand what a human being is. And it's doing that by the way in which it enables and constrains Turkers and the way that it relates Turkers to larger systems. So for us, we're interested in looking at like a human intelligence task.
But it's also the way it constrains relationships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
And
hopefully, like design is a little bit more approachable than the math required for.
Oh yeah.
But like, I think of interfaces as like language. I mean, you're communicating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a button says "click me." The way you group things means this has meaning. This is related to each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think trying to pull that apart, because I don't have a background in rhetoric and how those types of things are viewed by you all. It would be interesting to see pull apart an interface like that.
Yeah. Because I mean, a couple of ways that this gets broached is, I mean, through UX in our field, right? I mean, professional and technical writing, one of our central concerns is user experience. And so we do, examine those kind of elements for, as you say, I mean, their suasive effect. I mean, how they present paradigms that we don't necessarily acknowledge as having an embedded ethic in them, right? This is how you should interact with each other. And, I mean, that's enforced through what you can and can't do. I mean, even going back to, Gibsonian affordances, right? I mean, it's like, this is a tool that invites certain interactions, or Latour, right? He's like a knife wants to stab, right? I mean, it's like not exactly the same way a human does, but a knife wants to stab. It's a knife, right? Yeah. So, I mean, this is a fascinating aspect of this, right? And it's one we didn't really consider, is like the interface that we use to construct those hits, right? We didn't go far enough back into that. We consider aspects of it. So like one thing we looked at was, now on Turk, there's the qualifications, right, came up for us. Like we want people, who've done a certain number of hits and have a certain number of response rates. And so we consciously imposed those, and then also had ones that were just wide open, right? So we could compare the difference. But that led us to this conversation about qualifications that, MTurk now has the master's qualification, but the Turker feedback on that is that it's opaque. It's like, we don't know how it gets assigned. What's that?
It's completely opaque to them.
Yeah. And so we consciously said, well, we don't want to use that. So we used the older, this threshold of number completed and acceptance rate, because it's clear,
that the master's thing is opaque enough that there's folklore about it. That
right.
there are these golden ticket sort of hits.
Oh wow.
And then that folklore of that is known by requesters, who then use that folklore to have things done. So there's one of the at least it was. I haven't looked at these in a while, so some of this may be dated, but there was folklore about their golden ticket hits, that if you do this particular task that's hidden in all these other tasks, that is the thing that it rewards you with a master's.
Wow.
Because it seemed random to them. So there was a company that called themselves something with Amazon, but it was not Amazon. And they paid 0 cents for their hit. I think they've outlawed, or they've not outlawed, but no longer allow 0 hits. But at the time they did. And so people would do these with the expectation that, oh, this must be that hit.
Right.
And that was masters. They have a lot of different masters qualifications. This was when they only had like one. They have they have a lot of qualifications now. And then so in terms of like design, well, that's a very opaque policy. Like it's a whole knot. There's this paper, I often think about this policy knot paper, but it's impossible to take design and policy and everything apart.
Right.
When you get to systems like these. But so then on the other side, what makes those masters hits so or that master's qualification so valuable is like when you create a hit, at least it was, I haven't created one in a little while, it would default you to the master's qualification because you're going to get better workers.
Mm-hmm.
But also Amazon gets a bigger cut of masters hits.
Really? That's right, because it's not a basic qualification. That's right. Yes.
Right, you've got to, yeah.
So it's really hard when you start to pull these things apart. And if you're trying to isolate too much, like the language in a hit, for instance, you're going to get some noisy signals because the hits are just a small part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the hit design. So what the Turkers are looking for in terms of hit design, other than just proper remuneration, is a relation. Like, is this a reliable requester? Because they get scammed a lot too. And do I know enough? Like, can I predictably do this successfully?
Right.
So like, because their reputation is pretty meaningful for maintaining access to higher bands of pay. So they're looking for, do I know what to do? Is it an understandable design? Does it, is there a bunch of objective stuff? Is this a majority voting thing? What is the pay structure for this? Is it something that I know I'll get paid for?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something, in fact, in our hit design, that was something we pointed out. It's like, this is not majority. Right? You do this, you get it, right? I mean, we foregrounded, because we looked at your work and online through some of the Turker communities that, kind of helpfully sometimes publish things. Like, it's like, this is a guide for what a decent hit looks like. And so we tried to replicate that as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, that these are the kind of questions we're exactly interested in. It's like, I mean, the interaction here between, because I mean, we've made a lot of hay of the fact that Amazon consciously calls this mechanical Turk. The history of that device, right? I mean, it's like, it fuses the notion of like, what's human and non in this? To what degree is this deception, right? Because, I mean, as we talked about with Dr. Kang, it's like, this was a magic trick, but no one was fooled. No one thought this was a robot. It's just like, oh, this is really neat what they're doing. And where is the human in this, right? And that term has come to get associated with a different kind of pejorative notion of, hey, here's an algorithm that does this, when in fact it's a concealed labor pool, right? It's a bunch of people in another part of the world who are doing all these jobs, and there's sleight of hand about it.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, you remember their first tagline was artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
we put that in there. Yeah,
there's no attempt. There's no. I mean, at least the guy that did the original Mechanical Turk had like a stage presence, right? There's no flourish here. They're just like looking straight in the camera, going, "It's like David Copperfield going, yeah, no, the boat's still there, guys." Like, no, at least do some jazz hands or something before you do it.
I mean, there's sort of like this belief that if you gather enough data, you'll be able to train an algorithm to do it. So that's where that sort of artificial intelligence comes from. And that's where like Uber was, pretty into like self-driving cars, because they view humans like both of these view humans, which is artificial intelligence means intelligence. Um, thanks. Of using humans as stepping stones to what they really want to do, which is just make it servers. We ran into this at Xerox too. They've been doing this in call centers for a long time, right? You went from like have a conversation with somebody, have a script. That script is a stepping stone to a call tree, right? Which is a stepping stone to the terrible chat bots we get on systems that don't answer any of our questions. But they've done huge stuff in machine learning and AI.
Right.
Like it's crazy what they're doing now. I mean, GPT-3 is magic, but
Until it isn't.
Until it isn't, yeah.
Yeah. Until it suggests the person who's exhibiting signs of depression, it says, "Why don't you kill yourself?" Right?
Yeah.
Which apparently it did.
Oh boy. Well, right, because to go back to what Ben said earlier, right, it depends on what's the corpus what's the data set it's being trained on, right? It can only know what it knows, right?
It doesn't have judgment. It just has probability.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the impetus of this project, but is, the subtitle of this is tracing the human, right? In Amazon Mechanical Turks. And that's kind of like one of the ways we got into this is, Mechanical Turks is so fascinating because it's like, this is explicit, it's economically driven. So it's not a sort of abstruse notion of like what a human is, right? As, this sort of rational Cartesian creature or whatever. It's like, no, this is just dollars and cents. And it's like, so what remains? I guess that's a Platonic way of viewing things, but it's like, what is it that is characteristically human would emerge on that platform? Because it's like, this is what we need humans to do. If we could cheaply do this by machine, we would, but it's kind of led us to, I don't know. I mean, to places we didn't anticipate it going. It wasn't quite as easy as like, well, this is what is left for humans to do. They're just kind of training machines to take their job. It's open to this sort of broader question of the relationships between the humans and the platforms.
Yeah, I think that increasingly we were interested in the human intelligence task, but I think we've realized it's human, it's intelligence, and the task, right? That all three are shaping each other, right? So the task gets to what you were saying, Ben, about the design of right? How's the task actually being given to them? How's it being framed for them? And then how does that then suggest something about the intelligence they need to bring to bear? And then ultimately, how does that then shape how they understand themselves as humans in that dynamic? But you have to be looking at all three of those terms and how they're getting deployed and implemented and designed.
Yeah, and then one of the things you were saying, either in your email or something that I wrote some notes about, was signaling. How do they signal that they're humans or something like this?
Yeah.
Some of them like the anonymity of it. Like, remember that Turkers are all sorts of folks. Requesters are all sorts of folks. And I think it's easy for, like, this is one of the things they don't like in the writing, getting back to that, is that, academics sometimes make generalizations about them as a stakeholder, as opposed to a group of individuals that is a stakeholder group, but they have there's lots of different folks in them, right?
Right.
Like, there are people there are Turkers that have standing relationships with requesters, and the platform is almost just a task assignment to like these group of people, or like just a payment, like a way to pay people. It's like it's a platform, and it is a relatively flexible one that can be appropriated all kinds of different ways. whereas Uber is less flexible.
Mm.
And it can't be appropriated in all the same ways, right? And then that would be for a rhetorician. It's hard to get my mouth around that word.
Well, in the field itself is
look,
notorious about, when you ask, it's like, what do you do? It's like, that's our defining question. Who are you?
But if you would look at the evolution of platforms and what they mean too, because there's some things that they're learning from each other, and it evolves. This happens from a technical standpoint, but also from just, I'm going to say the rhetoric at the risk of not meaning rhetoric to rhetoricians, but like the rhetoric evolves as well as they learn from mistakes of previous platforms. In some good ways and some bad ways. There are also co-op platforms, which are owned and operated by the workers. And they even though there are some parts of AI that would help them, some of them resist it because they feel dehumanized by the platforms that they came from. But for something like Amazon Mechanical Turk, what's really nice about studying Amazon Mechanical Turk, I can look at tasks. I can see what's happening. There's a bound of visibility. From a technical standpoint, I can crawl it because it's on the web. Guess what I can't do for Uber?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you need like a pool of participants who screenshot or something. Yeah.
Even that, they change.
Yeah.
So there was some stuff that scraped receipts, and they changed it so the receipts took up more space. So these are evolving things. Like platforms aren't static.
Yeah.
And they evolve. And so like it's the whole mesh of the thing that makes it a mess and interesting.
It was getting at what we sort of started earlier, right? That really understanding platforms, you really have to understand platforms as practices as opposed to things, right? That it looks like a product, but actually it's a series of interconnected processes that as they shift, the whole shifts as a response.
Yeah, and that'll really be interesting, I think, for that third product in our discussion of cultural techniques, because we were looking at a range of different things that are like this, right? Ranging from like, Be My Eyes, the one that's volunteer labor for folks who have visual impairments, like if they need help at the grocery store. Yeah,
I know them.
And so we were looking at, the different permutations of this kind of Turk-like, I don't want to say Turkish, Turk-like labor. Again, we haven't really got a clear path in there, but
was that earlier we looked at that book called Heteromation. Right, that there's something analogous here to ATM machines and self checkouts, right? There's a way in which it mediates the process some way, and it doesn't get rid of, right, the teller doesn't replace a human, it just it turns the customer into the teller, right? So there's still, it's not fully automated like the self-checkout machine. There's the reading of the self-checkout, like the automated checkout machine, that it's automated it. No, they've just gotten rid of the cashier and made you the cashier, right? So it's still, they've not
no labor savings. They're just
right.
moved.
They've not labor. They've saved on labor, but it's still the same. There's a human being, but the human being is now on the other side of the counter, right? And so in that sense, it's kind of analogous to this kind of artificial intelligence. It's this, automated labor. The ATM just lets the bank off the hook for supplying the human.
Yeah, I sort of wonder sometimes if in the net this is not as efficient. There's some things that, like, there are just some things that you can't deny that this kind of stuff is enabled. So a lot of stuff has been made about the reason, machine learning is so great now they figured out how to run it on graphics cards and like do lots of parallelization. But there's also that they can get lots of training data from some places like Amazon Mechanical Turk. And but we don't talk about it as much, right? It's not like, oh my gosh, thank you, Amazon Mechanical Turkers, for enabling all this amazing stuff. It's like the credit goes to the people doing the algorithms and the people building the hardware.
Right.
So it's like there's a lot of hours of work that have gone into labeling data that like it's important. I don't think they quite realize the value of their labor all the time, because if nobody did any of these labeling tasks or any of these cleaning up of what you see online, it'd be a different internet.
Yeah, that kind of resonates a little, because like we were looking at Polanyi's labor paradox of how high skill and low skill can be unified in terms of these are tough things to articulate, right? And also the split of essential and non-essential during COVID, right? Where it's like essential, doctors and cashiers, right?
Right.
There are these interesting kind of labor splits here and how that's valued differently. Yeah.
They have real expertise. Amazon Mechanical Turkers are very skilled.
Yeah.
Go try and make $1 an hour on Amazon Mechanical Turk. It's hard.
Right.
They do something that is hard, right?
And valuable.
And extremely valuable.
Yeah.
That's interesting also. And we should wrap up because we don't want to take too much of your time. But it's interesting also in terms of our conceit of seeing this as human labor, when what we might be seeing is a specialized profession, right? I mean, we're extrapolating potentially in ways that it's like this would be no different if we were looking at any other high skill profession than saying, oh, well, that's what humans do. It's like, well, that's a thing humans do, but we can't say it's characteristic,
Yeah, if you get a chance, watch one, like let one of them try and get a Turker, like observe what they're doing. And you're like, ooh, they do heavy customization of their environment. They have to.
Yeah.
They're very technically skilled, like, but there are also bad Turkers. There's bad requesters. There's good requesters. There's good Turkers. There's ones that have a very strong sense of ethics, ones that don't. Like, it's a very diverse, I mean, they're people.
Yeah. You got me thinking about, in our own field, there's he's recently passed away, but Mike Rose writes a book called Lives on the Boundaries and some other ones. And he looks at these like wait staff and short order cooks, and there's a lot of but besides, like when you said customizing their environment, right? That the way that the work of and this may be breaching into some psych. One of my undergraduate degrees was in social psychology. So I've got a little bit of the org psych, some stuff like tickles some part of my undergrad brain that I get overexcited about. But the way that a short order chef, like, how do they keep it all in their head? Well, they don't actually. They organize the griddle in such a way, but they're hugely customizing. That allows them to do this highly choreographed activity.
Cool.
But it strikes me as a parallel to what you see Turkers doing, right? That
using third-party plugins and
right.
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of cognitive incorporation of your material environment. Yeah. Well, these are fascinating questions, and I mean, there's all this interesting overlap. I mean, that's part of why we were interested in this project. Is it's like there's just so much potentially that can be done with this, and we're just trying to itch at a little corner. We keep kind of because I mean, it's like you pull at this and it's just like a sweater. It's just like we have to.
Right.
Yeah, the gig economy is really complicated.
Yeah.
Also, they're not usually just Turkers. They have a portfolio of platforms they work for.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they specialize in, and within Mechanical Turk, you have different people that have specializations on the types of tasks they
Sure.
do. And they have different environments for, some of them will have different things they do, and they have different environments set up for each type of thing.
Yeah, right.
Different countries have different things they have to optimize for different reasons. You know, India, when our studies in India, they optimized maintaining internet access. Some of that's true in the US, but not quite the same way. And then they, in the US, they'd have to, because earning power is so much higher. I don't know which, anyway, money, it takes more money to live here. They would do throughput was what they would optimize for. So there's lots of complexity in how they do. It's not just I open a task and do it.
Right. Yeah. They've got to,
There's a lot of like,
it's a whole cockpit you're sitting in, basically.
Right.
Locating the tasks is really hard, you know, figuring out where to find who's a good requester, who's not, minimize, like keeping your risk calculation right, like all that stuff is stuff they're doing.
Yeah, because an hour chasing down an unpaying, I mean, right, that's,
time is so literally money in that scenario. Yeah. Well, we didn't want to keep you. It looks like we're at our hour. We didn't want to keep you too long, but thank you so much. This has been really helpful for us. I think it's also pointed us at some things we potentially should be considering here as well.
We might
hit all your questions that you emailed me.
I think so. I mean, I think some of them we got at sideways.
Yeah. As happens.
Your questions of how they do their own visibility, I haven't looked into, but I've looked at visibility of work and invisibility of work. And then there's things that when you from the feminist like labor stuff, when you consider work, when work becomes invisible,
right,
it takes on certain properties like isn't considered real work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that in Amazon Mechanical Turk, like these layers of invisibility.
Yeah.
In ways it even seems like, I mean, the whole question of particularly Turkers, right, when they're represented, that they see that visibility, invisibility as potentially as a resource, right? There's ways in which they want to be visible, and then also ways in which they don't, right? Because that allows for certain kinds of wiggle room or.
Yeah.
Well, they also don't have to disclose as much about themselves to employers.
Yeah.
Which is important to some of them.
Right.
So they often don't want to make themselves, not often. There are some Turkers that do not want to disclose much or would prefer to be more invisible than visible, I would say.
Yeah.
But not all of them. They're all different people, right? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, this has been fascinating. And I can't speak from Jerry, but I suspect we might bother you down the road.
Yeah, we might have to shoot you a couple emails. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been working on this a while, so.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, and that's, because we have our own sort of paths into this, in part because, like, it's sort of, a lot of people in rhetoric get here not through a direct route. You get here through, like I was also working in web stuff. So like I was our Linux admin back when we were in grad school. And so you get to this, you usually get.
I noticed like the lamp stack on you.
Yeah.
Like,
that's what I thought I'd be doing out here.
See on a English professor's thing.
Yeah.
GIMP. Yeah, like you've been using it looks like Linux for a while. So
Yeah, I mean, for server stuff, definitely. My main home stuff, I'm still on Macs, but definitely on the server side, that's they let us be the tech people in English departments,
Yeah,
the writing and
mostly,
rhetoric people. They let us
mostly
be the computer
by
people.
default.
Really?
I mean,
Why?
oh yeah, it's we just well because I mean you can imagine sort of stereotypical English departments largely with literature people. I mean, I'll be in a department meeting where someone will have a question about math, and they'll look at me going, "You probably know this," because I'm as close as they can imagine to yeah. So I'm if the I mean speaking of Xerox, if there's a printer jam, like
That's
that's
all the
me.
purview.
That's like go if I can't get my internet to work, hop on down to Nathaniel's office. You'll probably, and the problem is like 9 out of 10 times I can do it, and I should actually pretend I can't, so I get left alone. But I mean, particularly when I was untenured, anything anybody would ask me to do, I'm like, yeah, I'll change out the toner. You know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
When you get your bachelor's in CS, everybody hears, and suddenly everybody brings their computer, like they're your best
Sure.
friend, and like, hey, can you fix this? It's like, yes.
yeah. So, but we end up too the kinds of classes that we teach. We end up with a diverse range of students. So I have a couple of undergraduates that have graduated. I stay in touch with one studying augmented reality stuff and was a computer science English double major. So there's some interesting, I think, particularly around rhetoric and the way that it's gotten into professional writing and tech writing, but also just its attention on audience leads itself into some natural affinities with human computer interaction and design, right? Anything that gets at how material arrangements and relationships starts to shape how people do things, then there's also some really common threads that can get pulled on.
Yeah, I had somebody from the English department on my dissertation committee.
Nice. Yeah,
I don't know where he's wound up. I don't think he's in the English department anymore. He switched departments after tenure or something, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again so much. This has been really helpful for us. Yeah, fantastic. It's always fantastic to talk to folks who are, who are working on this kind of stuff, and often that's folks from outside of our field. So.
Yeah, you guys got my attention when it was like two English professors are wanting to talk to you about Amazon Mechanical Turk. Like, how could I pass this up? Yeah.
You know what? Novelty
what do they want to know?
Novelty does a lot of work.
Yeah, that's often our field's way in is always sort of like because it's like we don't have a strongly defined field. So we're always kind of like sideways onto other fields, right? So we're a little bit in comm and English. And then, I mean, we dip into tech and then in science because, like a lot of what we teach is science writing. And yeah, we are sort of a little bit like Turkers that we have this sort of play between visibility and invisibility. We don't have our own, we're sort of pseudo-parasitical on other institutions.
HCI is not too dissimilar. I mean, we study, it's somewhat defined, but it's like, well, what do you do? Human computer interaction. What's that? Like, yeah, all of it.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It's.
Do you use a computer?
What do you got?
That. Right. Right.
You're a human with a computer interacting with it.
Well, that's what's so great is the field is whatever those arrangements are in that particular moment, right? It's all.
So we don't have as strict of like publishing venues. Like we're not as restricted with venues.
Yeah.
We're all over too. Yeah. I mean, even the earliest rhetoricians just traveled around Greece looking for work. They were itinerant
teachers.
They just walked around going, you guys want to can I help you with the speech? And then they'd go from one place to the next, right? They were.
I can help you get your land back from the Sicilian court system. Where it started.
Yeah. So we got a lot of work in Athens, not so much in Sparta. The Sparta had strict immigration policies. Yeah. So occasionally we got chased out of town and or maimed. Cicero,
got
one of
put to
our
death for it. Yeah.
Cicero was famously had his hands and his tongue cut out because as an orator, those were his.
Yeah. Can't
So they
write,
were.
can't speak.
Yeah,
We may
Mark
be
Antony's
heading
wife.
to being chased out of town as computer scientists, as the as we torch our entire world with social media. But there may be a backlash.
Yeah, I don't. No, we're always.
We'll figure that out when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, if it happens.
Do you all know about like the AI winter and all this type of stuff that happened? And that people are thinking there's a second AI winter and this type of stuff. Are you aware of this stuff? So back in was it the 80s? There was a bit, tell me if this sounds familiar, AI and ML stuff overpromised.
Right.
And back then it was mostly rule-based. And so when I was in school in the 90s, like AI was like, we don't really talk about that. And then we didn't really talk about that for a while. That's why they called it machine learning, because it was, this is definitely not AI, guys. And then but there's a lot of people over promising what it can do. And you can start to see that like, we don't have all the stuff we were promised a few years back. But
no,
that sort of thing underlies a lot of this artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, I think the first wave of artificial intelligence not panning out is part of what brought Jeremy and I together, because we got interested in the way that development or lack of development influenced people in like neuroscience and cognitive science, because so much of the early models for artificial intelligence were predicated on a certain model of the mind. And when that didn't pan out, then people in cognitive science had to go, well, if we can't get artificial intelligence to work with this model of the mind, then we need to rethink about it. And so Jeremy and I did some stuff in extended cognition and stuff like that. And that was our kind of interest, right? Because the what they thought intelligence was in part informed the difficulty of making an artificial version of it, because they thought of it as very rules-based as opposed to environment or task-based and stuff like that. And so, questions of how much computational power you need, where it could be that for intelligent action, you actually need sensors as opposed to representations and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I liked the term machine learning better for that reason, because it's a way a machine learns is not the same way that a person learns. I've had yelling and screaming arguments with more I'm computer scientist, but I'm not the hardcore machine learning one, that like we're Bayesian creatures. It's like, no, we're not Bayesian. Like there's parts of it that are
right,
but it doesn't we can't be defined by that, whereas the algorithms you're doing are
right.
And that's why sometimes we do different stuff. Like, trust me, humans aren't all that rational all the time.
Oh yeah, no, there's Andy Clark, the cognitive science we like. He says we're bad at logic, good at frisbee. This notion of because a lot of early intelligence, they would say when you're catching a frisbee, human beings must be computing. No, they're just keeping they're just keeping the frisbee at the same right there. You use the frisbee to catch the frisbee, not an internal model of the frisbee, right? You use shadow and light and wind and so we're more like Roombas than anything, right? We're just a bunch of sensors, and you bounce into one thing and you go the other way, right? So
yeah, I've had conversations with people that says, oh, if I have enough data, human conversation is just a bunch of rules, I can solve it. And you're like, no, it's not, because there's the whole we rely a lot on common ground theory for how you explain things to people with interfaces. It's like if you can say the same sentence to each person, it means something different.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if it's rule driven, there's a whole bunch of different interacting and competing sets of rules.
Right. Right.
If it is indeed all rule based, but there's not one. That's the problem, right? There's a lot of them, and sometimes they get in each other's way.
Yeah. Anyway, well, it's been very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I can,
Got it,
and I can
yeah.
tell if we could just keep going. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe maybe you could be a recurring character. We can, we can.
That's
God
one of the
help
best
us,
parts of
yeah.
this is we get to talk to folks that otherwise we wouldn't get to talk to for these for these purposes, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk to other disciplines.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Particularly in a kind of low stakes, right? This isn't like it's not where you're meeting with another department and it's a budget meeting. Nothing
Yeah.
interdisciplinary is going to happen there. But if it's just like casual conversation,
No, this is the kind of stuff that actually we liked about graduate school.
Right.
yes, yeah,
Like
no,
why we stayed. And it's like, it doesn't get to happen very much, it seems like.
no, it doesn't. Yeah, if we did this
Particularly
later
now.
in the day, we would have cracked open a beer or something like that. Yeah. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, this has been really fun. So yeah, if you need anything, keep in touch.
Yeah,
Maybe-
absolutely.
Maybe we could do a paper on the rhetoric of design or something.
We'd love
sometime.
to.
That
Well,
would
and one
be,
reason why we were doing this publicly was, and you mentioned, way back at the beginning, sort of uptake is our goal was to build this, these data sets where other people could do other stuff. But, the perpetual problem is people don't want to use your stuff a lot of times. It's like they're doing their own stuff, right? So, I mean, like that's a problem I had with an earlier project is, it's like, as you say, it's like, make this tool. I'd love for people to do research with it. It's like, they're not going to do it.
No.
It was so tough to get buy-in, it's like, okay, I get it. So
yeah, I could use your term, but I could coin a God, I can't even think of the word for a new word.
neologism.
Yeah, right. That's a big thing in our field. Like, no, I'm not going to
We
use
do that
your
all
term.
the time because
Yeah.
it's like if mine catches on, I'll get lots of citations.
There we go. Yeah, I'm looking for that H, baby.
They're like, I don't really like your term.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's not precisely what I'm
guilty
doing.
of doing that a few times myself, though. So
Oh, sure. No. Yeah. No. I think we've all.
Of course.
Yeah. If I don't coin a term a year, I don't feel like I'm super productive.
I like to make up at least 5 words that nobody will understand in a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, yeah, I've got
Okay.
another meeting I got to hop on.
Yeah.
I could stay on all day, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all got stuff to do. So
Well, now we have homework. We have a wrap-up meeting between us after this. So
okay. Well, yeah, then I'll get off.
All right.
right.
Bye.
See you all later.
all right. See ya. Okie doke.
That was fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of what we're doing, I don't know if we can for this paper. That question of like, did you look at the interface you were using to make the hit? That I got stuck on that. I was like, oh boy,
I wonder if that's. I mean, is that I don't not a spin-off, but maybe something we could come back around to, right? That do the third piece and then see how, because it strikes me that the first 3 pieces are, I mean, we've had this conversation multiple times, right? They're all, what defines them is method.
Yeah.
Right. So one is quantitative, one's qualitative, and then one's theory as a method. Right. And then maybe once we have all those 3s, now how would we bring that to bear on then, almost then loop back around to then some other facet of mechanical Turks. Yeah, because I think that would be.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't do everything you want to do. I mean, even getting somebody who's like a UX person and being like, what are the ways this is inducing, because definitely, I mean, there's theoretical background to that in materialist rhetoric. I mean, where it's
right.
I mean, as I mentioned, even Gibson, where it's like that interface is prompting, right? I mean, it's inducing you. I mean, as Ben was saying, it's like, it's not just, it's like, here are the choices, here's the interface. It's like, it's establishing the paradigm for how you are viewing the Turkers, right?
Yeah, I forget. I think it was when you use the word frame a couple times, it really grabbed me, right? That it's literally framing that relationship
Yeah.
and constituting it in some, yeah.
And the way you get the data out of them as tied to their, to task and user ID, where it's like it's a sequence of numbers that has output, right? There was the kind of rare moments where, for example, someone contacted me and were like, hey, I did this, but I didn't get paid, and here's why. It's like, I'd have to track it down, but there was this case of like a human Turker being like, I'm a human Turker because I'm a worker and I did this, and I just want to make sure I get paid. And I did, I was like, cool. I checked, and like, it was just sort of like, they closed the window before they got their ID or whatever, but
Yeah.
they did it. And here's a way to trace, right. To let me, to see that they actually did it, which in fact, it's like, if you're going to the trouble of writing to someone about, hey, I did this and I didn't get paid. It's like that, the act of doing that probably took as much time and energy as actually doing it. So it's like, if you're doing it, you're going to get money from me just because it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a labor unit.
And the labor of contacting me is labor you're not going to get compensated
Yes,
for.
right, exactly. It's zero sum here, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's like, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting vein.
Yeah.
That I don't know if it's works its way into this piece, but it is a super interesting question that probably we should have thought of. But this is why we have other folks who are like, hey, did you consider the interface and the way that is inducing you?
Yeah, maybe it's a spin-off collaboration. Maybe
maybe we ask him to write that with us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it'd be like Joni Loves Chachi or Fish, these famous spin-off programs from 70s sitcoms.
But I mean, that could be a cool thing where it's like, yeah, let's get someone like him who's HCI.
Yeah, well,
and we have a rhetoric background. I'm like, yeah, how does this crowd work interface? And I mean, even potentially, it's like, how does that compare to the inducement of like an Uber, where you're viewing although that would be different because like you're not setting up jobs for Uber. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your input is, I need a ride, not here's a task I want you to do.
Right. There's just one human intelligence task, and it take me to the airport.
Yeah. It's give me a lift.
No, well, and just what would be neat about it, and that's not an unimportant criteria, is it'd be really neat if one of the products that came out of this project was a collaboration with someone that wasn't initially involved in it, right? Or that isn't us, could potentially, like, now we're running a center, babe. I mean, now we're cooking, right? Now there's other people doing work within this is exciting just on its face.
I mean, was the goal.
Yeah.
Just as we talked about at the end, it's so hard to get traction on those kind of things.
Yeah, and he's built like actual useful tools. I can see nobody wanting to pick up what we're doing, but
which is more focused on like data. What it's more generating is data.
Yeah, but no, I'm pleasantly surprised, but then also thinking about it, not surprised.
Right.
That we were all three on the same page. I think, right, that the human computer interaction and other conversations we've had about it and people that we know in it, there's some, I think, really strong resonances, right? Even as he was talking about, right, each time there's a human computer interaction, that's our field, but without the actual specificity of that arrangement, it's hard to talk about it, which I think is very much, well, what's rhetoric? Well, I'm going to have to give you an example. It's all examples, right? There's no, it's always whatever rhetoric is, however it unfolds in a particular kairotic moment. It strikes me that's kind of, a similar thing with HCI.
Right. We just, with my grad students, we just wrapped up the Gorgias, where it's literally the definitional question of, what is it that you do? And the whole thing is an unsatisfying answer to that, which you can see rhetorically is like, yeah, that's the point. It's like I know what you want, Socrates, but this field is that which cannot give that to you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. As always, these conversations are always great. there's always the backside of it though, where it's like, oh gosh, now I have like this list of we have to fix. We have to fix so much stuff. I'm
Yeah.
not. I don't. I'm going to review my notes and see like, okay,
Yeah, I don't think
does it fix the second one? Is it something for the third one?
Or is it just
something for a different work completely?
Yeah, I think, right. I mean, in many ways, it's. I mean, maybe the feeling is not necessarily we have to fix stuff. It's we just got handed a bunch of cool stuff, and now we got to decide. Okay, can we play with it now, or do we have to save it for later, or do we go back to the source again?
The information he had about the and I don't know. You know what? This might even come up as one of the video clips that we work in. I might make a note here because when he was talking about the master's qualification,
yeah,
I knew some of that because like if you search for it, there's subreddits where they're like that folklore. I love that he used folklore because I use that a lot to describe like departmental policies where it's just a practice that's not codified. Yeah. And it gives you latitude, but it's also terrifying because it means, if you go for tenure, it's like there's no checklist,
Yeah, but and the idea that the folklore then got
reappropriated.
It became right for me forever. Like, oh no, the folklore is just as a material component of this system.
Yeah,
but it gets its materiality precisely from being immaterial. That was, I mean, insidious.
I mean, the fact that requesters then incorporate, it's like, and I didn't even get a chance to blurt this out, but it's like part of that also is the compensation strategy of zero.
Zero. Right?
If it's zero, but then you have the secret code word in there where you're like, I can't say masters, but I mean it. It has to be zero because then people see it as, oh, well, then why else would you do it? I mean, it's so rhetorically complicated.
The fact that it's zero is guarantees it's the golden ticket.
Right. Yes. Why else would you do it? Why else would it be there?
Yeah. No, I think that's something to plug in because it's a further, because it's the way the second piece comments on the first one, which is in the first one, we really attended to the language of the hits. And in the second one, when we're doing our own, we realized that it's compensation that comes to matter. And it turns out, right, that compensation itself is actually complicated by this, like, even compensation isn't just as simple as the more money you pay, the more it's like, no, it's actually, so in many ways, it's a nice revisiting. Well, it isn't just the language.
It's just language. It's not just pay.
But it's not just pay either. There's other, yeah.
Interesting stuff. Yeah. So definitely, I think we can work some of those video clips, which I've already kind of in the draft earmarked. Like, I think there's a place where it says, Kegel talks about this. There's a place where, oh shoot, what's the other one I dropped in here? Well, I think I've got some notes in there where it's like, put video clip here. Oh, it's Sean. It's Sean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about things like transcriptions and captions and that kind of thing, that they're semantically complex, that it's not just transcription. And that kind of popped up to me the other day because it's like, what happens when three people are talking on a screen? How do you caption that, right? Crosstalk? Do you pick out the important one, right? How do you do that? It's a choice, right? It's not as simple as auto transcription. Anyway.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And I think
that was a good one. It was a good app. You know what? 58 episodes. We're still
we're still cooking.
Still got good. This is not a lost scenario where it really peters out at the end. We're still better than ever.
It's fascinating to me because no one's ever going to watch all these.
No.
But this has gone through the pandemic. It's pre-pandemic, during. We're at whatever stage we're at now. It's like,
I've moved offices. Like I go back and I'm just like, I've looked at the earlier videos. I'm like, I don't have that shirt anymore.
Yeah. I mean, there'd be an interesting way to kind of we probably should have been commenting on the pandemic throughout. So it's just sort of like, a diary where its value has nothing related to
You're right.
Topic. It's just sort of like
for some future project about academic work during the pandemic.
Exactly.
And this video series, yeah, or I'm not to. And this video is one of the few surviving.
Right. You never know.
We happen to be the ones that had a camera on during a historical event.
All right. Well, I'm gonna grab some lunch here and.
Yep. Sounds good.